Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Birk Weiberg and I'm here today with my co-host Max Frischknecht for the third Conversational Technologies talk from the Lucerne School of Design, Film and Art. For these talks, we invite designers, artists and scholars to help us understand how generative AI is changing creative practices and how the current developments relate to the ongoing entanglement of humans and machines. Previously, we talked about images, archives and literary practices with large language models. And today we will learn more about the data needed to train generative models and the legal and ethical questions that come with the usage of such data. Some quick housekeeping remarks. We are recording this event, as you can see, so please keep your mics muted. Feel free to have your cameras on if you are comfortable with it. It's always nice to see some people. We will begin with a presentation, then Max and I will start the discussion, and at the end we will open up for your questions and comments, so please don't forget these during the talk. This series of talks is organized by our Creativity and Digitality Hub in partnership with different degree programs. The Creativity and Digitality Hub is a recently established initiative of the school to promote research into and with new technologies in the arts. Today's talk was jointly organized by the Hub and the Data Design and Art Bachelor Program. And I'm happy to pass on to Max to tell you more about DDA and to introduce our guest today, Victoria Ivanova.
Thanks, Birk. I hope you hear me well. It just turned out somebody is doing craftsmanship in the room next door. So my name is Max Frischknecht. I'm a designer, researcher, and educator at Data Design and Art, which is a unique 3 year bachelor study course at the HSLU Luzern that focuses, as the name implies, at the intersection of data design and art. In a world which is continuously digitized, data plays an important role in many areas, such as medicine, the humanities, politics, or economics. And we believe that the visual, be it visualizations, installations, or the use of novel technologies such as virtual reality can contribute to the collective understanding of this data. And through that, hopefully also contribute to a societal benefit or increase participation. And in this context, of course, we also are facing questions of data ownership, democratization, and also how AI, among other pressing technologies, impacts these discussions. And therefore, I'm very happy to introduce our guest today. Victoria Ivanova is a London-based curator, writer, strategist working at the intersection of arts institutions, technology companies, and NGOs. She has a diverse background. She holds a Master of Science in Human Rights from the London School of Economics, a Master in Curatorial Studies from the Bard College, and a PhD from the London South Bank University, where she was part of the Center for the Studies of the Networked Image, a very interesting research group. Ivanova develops innovative approaches to policy, finance, and rights, primarily in cultural context, and currently she is also the R&D strategist lead at Serpentine Galleries in London. The Serpentine Galleries also have an arts technologies department since now 10 years, since 2014, where they commission and produce artworks that involve advanced technologies. And one of the most recent of these productions is The Call by Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, where they trained an AI model for a choral, a project that, among other aspects, also discusses the ethical, legal, and aesthetic issues raised by the transformation of culture into training data for AI models. So therefore, I'm happy to pass the floor over to you, Victoria, and I'm looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thanks so much, Birk and Max, and thanks to all of you for coming. I think that was a really great introduction that very accurately summarizes everything you need to know for the background. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a bit of background on Serpentine's Arts Technologies department. It's fairly unique in terms of the scope of work that we do. Then I'll introduce future ecosystems as an R&D platform that has emerged from the Arts Technologies department. That's sort of the side of the organization that I lead. And then, in a nested matryoshka style, I will talk about the call. So that's the project that Max just mentioned, which was a commission by our department to artists Holly Hearn and Matt Dryhurst. The commission had a lot of different elements. One of these elements is an exhibition, but there's also a technology development element, and then there's also the side of the equation that I took care of, which was initially called a data trust experiment, but became an establishment of a trusted data intermediary reality, and I'll explain what that is. And then I think we'll go into discussion. So that's the flow. Okay, so starting with Serpentine Arts Technology. So exactly as Max has mentioned, a semblance or a kind of a sort of a version of this department has existed since 2013. So for background, Serpentine is a contemporary art institution. It's a public institution in London, located in Kensington Gardens in West London. It's a Kunsthalle, I guess, in kind of your neck of the woods. That would be the kind of type of the organization. So we don't hold a collection. So since the establishment of the organization in the 70s, it's always specialized on contemporary art or contemporary artistic practices. And it's not an institution that had, let's say, a new media kind of oomph, like kind of wave that some organizations, I think, in Western Europe and in the US, but also globally, had in the sort of 80s and definitely 90s and definitely early 2000s. So actually, Serpentine came to technology quite late. And I think that's like an important thing to mention, that kind of the approach that was taken in this institution is quite different to a lot of new media arts organizational approaches, most, I think, significantly, like ZKM or in Karlsruhe or various organizations in the Netherlands, etc. So so how was this approach different? So given the sort of focus on contemporary practices and supporting experimentation in contemporary practices, the individual, Ben Vickers, who kind of started what was then known as a digital commissioning program. And it's also interesting to kind of observe the transformation of language that we have had, because it went from being digital to like arts technologies, which is sort of more of a reference to a larger emergent field than it is to a specific medium. And I think that's quite significant, just in terms of changing the optics and how we understand this work in a cultural institution. So the digital commissioning program, it basically meant just that. The artists were being commissioned to produce new artworks with various digital technologies. And these commissions, had an exhibition context to them, or they existed online. I started working at Serpentine around 2018, and part of my mandate, so the kind of the reason for the organization hiring me, was to help think through the development of this digital commissioning program into a department that has R&D depth to it. At that stage, we weren't quite sure what research and development could mean in the context of an art institution, but we wanted to sort of take this initial kind of DNA of the commissioning program and the focus on production of artworks and learnings that emerge in producing technology-based artworks as a sort of like nucleus or the heart of what the R&D program would be about. And so, it took us a couple of years to shape what this sort of R&D side of the department would be. But ultimately, the focus of the R&D department is on surfacing various critical areas at the nexus of art, technology, and society in relationship to various emerging advanced kind of technological constellations, and to conduct research and also later experiments on on certain sort of questions that we could surface in the context of producing new artworks that potentially would not be able to be surfaced in other contexts, such as commercial development contexts, etc. So to this extent, there were kind of a couple of different wings to the R&D activity. So one wing was a series of labs that's focused on specific areas. So for example, we had a legal lab that was particularly interested in kind of researching what are the new challenges that arise with art and technology commissions and art and technology kind of coming together as a constellation. Then we had a Creative AI Lab. We still have a Creative AI Lab, which is a collaboration with the University, King's College London, that was exploring how artists, and this was still in 2018, so this is pre the most recent generative AI boom, how kind of artists through developing artworks that are engaging with machine learning are devising some of the first user interfaces to what is otherwise at that stage was a black box technology. Then the kind of the scope of the Creative AI Lab became bigger, and there have been various different research projects with different organizations such as Google Art and Machine Intelligence Group that were run through it, but yeah, it became this kind of hub for AI-related research where the artistic field could be kind of utilized in an interesting exploratory fashion. Had a blockchain lab, which was specifically focused on new organizational models that were possible through blockchain technology. That was a collaboration with another organization in London called Furtherfield that is known for really interesting kind of work around art, technology, and activism. Yeah, so this is kind of the kind of the networked intelligence aspect to how kind of I built this part of the department was really critical to it. And so this idea of the institution kind of going outside of itself and becoming a party in multi-stakeholder collaborations, and kind of offering the art context really as a laboratory for investigating questions, like urgent questions around how we want to integrate and live with the new technologies that are becoming increasingly part of our lives. That was really that became the spirit of this work. And as we were doing this work over the years, it was important for us to somehow share the insights and the findings from this work and also from our colleagues who were engaging kind of in similar experiments, and to have some form of consolidated kind of strategic overview of why we think this evolving art and technology space is such an interesting ecosystem for societal experimentation. So that's how the Future Art Ecosystems Strategic Briefing Series was born. And it's basically an annual publication that, as I said, shares findings from the various experiments at the intersection of art and technology, but also critically kind of tries to provide a very different approach to why art and technology work is important and how it needs to be supported. That's a little bit distinct from the more kind of mainstream cultural discourses around critical art or fine art or the role of the exhibition, etc. So that's really that became the role of these strategic briefing series. And increasingly we started using this sort of language around future art ecosystems more and more because we felt like it was it represented this larger ecosystemic effort that was being undertaken. It wasn't just about Serpentine; it was really about this configuration of different actors. And eventually, future art ecosystems then became a platform for very concrete I guess, development of proof of concepts for various infrastructural forms. And so now I will just share my screen so that I can slightly make this a little bit more specific in terms of, 1 second, sorry, let me just do this stuff. Okay. Yeah, hey, can you see this? Yeah? Cool. Yeah, so this is Future Art Ecosystems. As I said, although it's part of Serpentine Arts Technology, it's its own platform as well. And by platform, I really mean it more like an organizational entity, maybe an archipelago that kind of grows out of Serpentine. And as I said, like the community of people who have been part of this is incredibly important. It's ever growing. And the mission, as we evolved the sort of R&D side of the department and our partnerships, the mission really became to like was to enable this construction of cultural infrastructure to support art and advanced technologies for the public good. And it's sort of this art and advanced technology for the public good is really meant to be this sort of signaling of the creative R&D potential of the space that goes above and beyond the typical expectations of artworks and the kind of conceptual connotations that people usually sort of associate artworks with. And as I said, we have a number of R&D labs, these annual strategic briefings, and most importantly, the community of our collaborators, peers, and partners with whom we will A, develop this research, and B, then also produce various experiments. So last year in 2024, we published, so these are the various future ecosystems that have existed. We had one, as I'll talk about a bit more, public AI. There was one in decentralized technologies on metaverse. And the first one was really laying of the land, which was art and advanced technologies more generally. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so the one that we published in 2024 was called Art and Public AI. And as I already mentioned, we have already had this kind of, I guess it's not that long in terms of real life, but I guess in the kind of technology, and especially AI age, we've had a long-standing engagement with AI going back all the way to 2018. And so we built, on that research, but decided, clearly because of all the events last year, that we need to produce a slightly more succinct vision for how we saw the art field's intervention into the generative AI context. And this concept of public AI, which, by the way, I like to mention this because I think a lot of people think that the concept of public AI kind of emerged, or at least was defined as part of the most recent Mozilla report. But I'm proud of the fact that ours actually predated it because we published this in March. But of course, these kind of conversations around publicness and AI, have existed for a long time. But it's just a fun little trivia fact. But the way that we sort of defined public AI was not through the sort of binary of proprietary versus open or public versus private, but more as a process and as a way of understanding how we can have a claim on the AI stack at different layers, whether that's the model layer, the data layer, or the compute layer. With the compute layer, it's much harder. But the idea that there are thin versions of publicness in relationship to AI, where the public aspect of it is just defined through the prism of open access. And then there's kind of the thickest version of the publicness as a quality of AI, which is the ability of different groups, different stakeholders within the AI development pipeline to benefit from the value that's generated, or to be able to determine the parameters according to which value will be distributed through these systems. And as I said, we sort of really wanted to look at AI not just some sort of kind of I guess, product technology, but more as a stack, and understand that there are a lot of different things in the stack that need to come together in order for generative AI capabilities to emerge. And of course, most importantly, it's this data layer and well, the software layer is what we see, the model layer and the compute layer, right? So these are kind of the critical areas. And our argument in this publication was that culture and art and cultural institutions as well, they're particularly well placed to actually make an intervention at the data layer. And so some of the kind of urgent questions, and so then the publication was split into sort of 3 chapters. One chapter was focusing on recommendations around like organizational aspects. One focused on the kind of role of the artist, and the other was on the role, and the third was on the role of the ecosystem, or the need to build an ecosystem for public AI. So when thinking about the data layer and how can culture contribute towards, like, I guess, increasing the publicness of the data layer and ensuring that cultural practitioners, artists, as contributors of data to AI models, have a larger say in what these models are, how they perform, how value is distributed. So that was kind of the thesis that we made, that there is an opportunity for the cultural sector to do that. And that's sort of the highlight of this was that civic organizations, of which cultural organizations are one type, are ultimately dormant data keepers. And this is like a new kind of perspective through which we need to understand these institutions. So of course, the most immediate way which we can understand this is through the prism of the collections that institutions hold. But even for organizations like ourselves that doesn't hold a collection, we also produce a lot of data in the process of producing artworks. And so there's something about this process that we thought we were interested in figuring out how can we use this process of production to test a model for greater agency vis-a-vis AI training, for the benefit of data contributors or cultural agents. Okay, let me just see one more thing. Yeah, so we had an ongoing collaboration with an organization called Radical Exchange that does a lot of, I guess, experimentation around political economies and new ways in which political economies need to be configured in an advanced technological age. And they published a sort of really interesting paper on this idea of data coalitions, and a data coalition as a mechanism for scaling the relatively negligible kind of individual agency of data holders to this more kind of scaled intermediate entity that would be able to enact certain levels of collective bargaining on behalf of the individual data subjects and in relationship to AI model developers. And so we were interested in thinking whether in one of the art projects that we're at that point about to start, which was this project I'm coming to with Holly Hurd and Matt Dryhurst, we could use this idea of a data coalition to create a data coalition, or we're also saying create a data trust, to kind of experiment with this question around data governance at a scale where collective bargaining becomes possible. So then we kind of fast forward to so I said that was the kind of critical question of future ecosystems for. Then to fast forward to this experiment. So as I already mentioned, our most recent commission was with artists Holly Hurd and Matt Dryhurst, and actually musicians and technologists and their practice so far, but they work a lot they worked a lot with AI, so they're from quite early on, and they're really interested in the kind of collaborative aspects of AI as part of their of their artistic methodology or toolkit. And so for the project at Serpentine, we developed this idea of developing a choral AI model that would be based, so that would be trained on a data set that was produced by us, our team. And the data set contains choral recordings from 15 choirs across the UK. So all of these choir members, of whom there were around 400, became data contributors to the data set. And there was a songbook that was especially devised, composed by the artists for the purposes of AI training. There was a special recording protocol that, once again, so everything was kind of optimized. The setup of the recording sessions was optimized to collect a data set that would be ideal for the training of the models. And so with that once we had gathered this data set, as I said, we also worked with the French Audio Institute, IRCAM, to develop what is known as the raw model, so trained on just this core data set. And then there's also the artist model, because they also added their own data sets, and they used various processing techniques in relationship to the data set, and hence they have kind of their own suite of models. But we also understood that this data set is now an asset, and so there may be a potential use of this data set in future AI development. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to build capacity amongst the choirs for collective data governance. So for the governance of this choral AI data set that goes beyond the current options that seem to be like kind of the state of the art, opting in or opting out. It looks like the UK Copyright Office will actually adopt an opt-out approach to the question of AI training. And but there's also a need to establish legal mechanisms in order to collectivize these rights and to create something like this data coalition, etc. I'm not going to go through all the details, but I think it's important to understand, so like, why did we do this? So I was saying in the beginning and kind of introducing our interest in public AI and in the intervention at the data layer as a way of like increasing participatory aspects of I guess data stewardship for the purposes of AI training. What the work that we wanted to do with the choirs was to build capacity for their collective action. And to this end, we hired a data steward who worked with the choirs to, first of all, kind of bridge the gap of knowledge that existed. A lot of people don't really understand how AI works. There's both fear and excitement. So Jen, as a data steward, was able to work with the choirs in order to ensure that there's like true bottom-up development of various governance tools. And lastly, we really wanted with this commission and particularly this aspect of the project to kind of LARP what good faith AI development could look like. So these are all the choirs who took place. It was quite a contracted timeline, so we did a lot in a very short period of time. But kind of circling back to this initial point that I made about us wanting to test some sort of collectivizing mechanism and a sustainable mechanism for stewarding a data set as an asset ultimately. We did a lot of legal research. We had support from different lawyers in trying to ascertain what is the best vehicle for that, because obviously coalition is a concept, but it's not a legal vehicle. And it became evident that in the context of the UK jurisdiction, at least, a company limited by guarantee, which is a type of trading entity, is actually the ideal vehicle for stewarding a data set on behalf of a group of people. So that's, and so when here it says formation of trusted data intermediary. So this sort of company limited by guarantee, which actually is Serpentine's trading entity. I mean, many public arts organizations in the UK have a trading entity in order to operate their shop, to operate sales of editions for fundraising or hiring of spaces. So we leverage that entity as this trusted data intermediary, which is now, we're still in the process of gathering signatures, but hopefully once we gather the signatures, it will officially become a trusted data intermediary. Okay, I am conscious of the time, so I'm just going to skip to one slide because I realize this is pretty technical, but at the same time, I think it'd be good to focus on the outcomes of this experiment. Okay. Yeah, so the way that we achieved that, I guess, as I said, trusted intermediary Serpentine trading entity. These are the details pertaining to the types of rights that the choristers had vis-a-vis the training data. So they had GDPR rights. I imagine that in Switzerland you have GDPR as well, right? Yeah, I'm sure, or a type of GDPR. And of course, there was IP because of recorded performances. And so, although there were only some choristers who had GDPR because they were not personally identifiable in the training process, all choristers had had performance rights, and so all choristers need to sign a licensing agreement to allow us to sublicense the data set onwards. And yes, and so once this trusted data intermediary entity comes into life, it's going to be an interesting process of, we already had requests from various entities. We had requests from an AI company, open source AI company, to train a new model. We had requests from a theater producer to use the models for soundtrack for their performance. We had requests from researchers to analyze the timbres and dialects of the voice in the data set. So it just opens up this really interesting, experimental research space through this sort of configuration of data infrastructure in the context of a cultural sector. I might stop here. Do you think this is good? I think that we covered a lot of ground. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I mean, that was a really great overview. And just think maybe let me start with, I would like to return to the concept of public AI because it is so central, and I mean, it's also the title of the publication. And just to clarify this term, because I think we can think it in two directions, and I just would like if you point me to the right direction, because I mean, you talked about the concepts of accountability, participation, accessibility, which are relevant in regard to public AI. So one direction to think that would be something like a democratic AI or something. On the other hand, what came in my mind is that a lot of artists who are training their own models, like in the exhibition right now, they sometimes talk about small AI, which has a different kind of idea of authorship in it. And so the question is, in which direction would you think that? I mean, small AI as an artist AI is more about authorship, and the other thing is more probably about control of the data and accessibility in general. So in which direction do you think is public
Yeah.
AI going?
I think both are relevant. I feel like they're just sort of looking at the sort of in question of public AI from different scales. So I do think that a more general kind of societal definition of public interest AI is important. And here I really do think it's about the agency that different stakeholders across the entire AI training and deployment pipeline have vis-a-vis the training and deployment of this technology. So what this means is that if we understand there's data model compute, it's like, well, what are the ways in which data contributors can shape how their training data is being utilized for models? In relationship to models, once again, it's like there are questions of openness. Is it an open source model? Are the weights open source? Which is slightly different to the question of publicness, but it overlaps, right? There's a Venn diagram kind of overlap there, and then there's the compute side, and the compute side I think it's the hardest because there's such kind of a near monopoly, or definitely like a very concentrated oligopoly over this resource, and it feels like currently only at the level of like sovereign state AI can there be some sort of claim to making the compute aspect more public, or at least to have like more public kind of accountability or public interest at the core of the engagement of that resource. So I think that would be, and the reason I think this notion of public interest or public AI is important is because we can't really treat AI as a new set of technological products. Of course, it is from one perspective, but it's also an infrastructure, right? And it's an infrastructure that utilizes so many of pre-existing public resources or commons-based resources that this is where I think culture is important in this double meaning. I think it's the role of culture to make this a wider cultural understanding that what AI, if there is going to be AI as part of all of our societal kind of interactions, it really needs to be approached as a public good. And if it's approached as public good, we need to have legal mechanisms, governance mechanisms, value distribution mechanisms that reflect that publicness. So that's kind of the macro. On this sort of micro scale of individual artistic practices, I was just speaking to a friend of mine who co-founded Spawning, which probably and he was mentioning how there's a lot of evidence now, both in terms of the kind of economies of scale becoming more advantageous for training of models becoming less compute intensive, and also the ability to train models in much smaller but higher quality data sets that actually the landscape of models is going to transform as a result of that. And it's going to be, apparently, I have no kind of statistical evidence for this. This is a bit anecdotal, easier to train these sort of smaller but very good models that are context specific. And that's, of course, what artists do. How do questions of public AI, I guess it's a modality of claiming AI as a public good that is also then a medium of artistic practice. So I think it does all kind of lock in. But perhaps it's not the most I think direct way of understanding, in my view, like what public AI is. For me, the public AI is really much more about this like bigger narrative and the bigger culture and a set of legal and organizational practices that we need to set up to really treat this as a public good infrastructure.
Thank you. Max?
Yeah, maybe I have a follow-up question. So I looked up the documentary of the call, and one of the artists mentioned that they understand the production of an AI model as kind of an artwork. And I find this very interesting. And if we continue this thought, we probably also end up having new ways of evaluating AI models, which are probably not so centered on benchmarks and statistics and stuff like that. So I would be interested, if we speak about AI as a public good, how do you imagine evaluation of AI models? Is there, I think we should think it completely different. Is there even an evaluation necessary, or what would be criteria you think should be in such an evaluation process?
Yeah, may I just double check what you mean by evaluation?
Yeah, so if you let's say you look into machine learning, recent machine learning papers or so, the evaluation of a machine learning model is always just a series of performances in benchmarks, how accurate it
Even that,
can
okay, I understand.
make math or stuff like that.
Yeah, no, okay, I understand the reference now. Okay. Yeah, well, I guess like the fairly obvious point is that, the artists are always interested in testing the limits of a medium or testing the affordances of a medium that are not so evident in the uses of this medium within its kind of like optimized, most economically or socially efficient manner, right? So I think for this reason, I guess a lot of artists, like jailbreaking models, they like thinking about different model architectures, playing around with weights, the sort of exploration of a latent space. These all then become artistic methodologies that are very medium specific. And so AI as medium, uh, it sort of becomes integrated into artistic practice. Now, what does that mean from the perspective of evaluation? Well, first of all, this in itself, I think going back to where I started around creative R&D and the art and technology space is an interesting space for R&D. There's an obvious like R&D potential, or at least latent potential in this kind of approach to AI as a medium. And I think that is a really fascinating context. I do wonder what like better ways to tap into it, and I can only assume that we'll see more and more collaborations between researchers, more scientific researchers, and AI artists who work in this manner, exactly like for the purposes of producing this alternative or new evaluation approaches. But similarly, then thinking more kind of culturally and in general, culturally, like societally, today we have like a very particular architecture for AI models that is based on also a very specific philosophy of cognition. And that is ultimately very human-centric. And, there have already been various artistic projects, for a while. And I think actually Berika mentioned this to you when we saw each other in in London. Like there, for example, oh my God, the name of them evades me, but I can add it later. Orphan Drift, I think so. They've been exploring kind of octopus intelligence as an alternative system of intelligence from which to then derive certain axioms on which then machine learning architectures would be built. And so there's that kind of evaluation. It's like, well, what model of intelligence are we using? A, like, what is it human? B, then like, what is the theory of cognition? Because there are also different theories of cognition. Then we can go deeper into like psychoanalysis and like these aspects as well, whether at individual, collective level. So of course, there's something about like having this like art exploration that is able to plug all of these questions into the AI research environment that seems fertile. Now, what does this mean in terms of like wider repercussions? Unclear, right? Because ultimately these experiments are they're pretty ad hoc, they're minute, they're very specific, they're usually small scale, right? So whereas today's foundation models, they are very general purpose, and there's a reason for that, because they want to capture as many users as possible, right? And so they use formats. That's the reason we have the chatbot interface for now. Maybe we'll move on to agents soon, right? But like that's the first, because that's the most intuitive thing for largest populations. But there could be so many other different interfaces, right? And I think that exploration it's an expression that artists who frequently have design and technology backgrounds, to be quite frank, right, are very well placed to do.
That sounds like a good advice for artists to go away from this anthropocentric AI imagine or concepts, which are probably so popular because they are most easily to become commercialized or something. An octopus AI is much more difficult to imagine how you make from that a product. But I have
Yeah.
another question, but it would be
The
fascinating.
go-to-market strategy is not
Yeah, yeah,
self-evident.
yeah. Scaling. I mean, I have another scaling question maybe. You mentioned about so this question of the GDPR and this opt-in, opt-out logic that we have in regard to data privacy. And I mean, what you are doing right now with the choirs is much more complicated. It's an ongoing negotiation, as I understand, without a finished result yet. So my question would
It
be,
is and
I
it
mean,
isn't. It's
it
sorry,
is,
it is.
yeah, yeah, no.
The line is drawn when we agreed the terms, and we
Hmm.
agreed the terms. And so there is a certain kind of consolidation of that in so they're signing this data mandate where they give us a mandate to exercise their GDPR rights on their behalf.
Hmm.
And we also have a licensing agreement that allows us to sub-license the data
Hmm.
set downstream on the terms that have been agreed. Sorry, just a small.
Yeah. No, the point what I was aiming at is how do this very simplified opt-in and opt-out in the long term relate to the negotiations? Because it's something, these negotiations is something that an economist would say doesn't scale. You know, you can't do that every time, you know. Is it something where you think from that will come out some result which then in the future can, I don't know, produce contracts or some alternatives to this opt-in, opt-out strategy which can be applied more easily? Or is it something that for some cases will always be necessary?
Yeah, it's very hard to say how this will play out because yeah, there's so many dependencies and interdependencies that can lead to very different scenarios. You know, there's regulatory lack of regulatory clarity regarding copyright. You know, once again, it's sort of this opt-in, opt-out aspect. You know, if you opt out, so Spawning, who I mentioned, they have this opt-out registry, right? And you know, my understanding is that the roadmap for them is then to allow those who have opted out to sublicense their material to model developers who are willing to respect their terms. And
Mm.
so you kind of create this like bargaining power. That's my understanding, but you know, you may need to verify that. I don't want to, but that would be my approach at least. And so I think something similar operates here where, you know, of course, thinking that this could be managed, like the kind of managing of agency can happen at the individual level is not realistic, right? This is the reason why we kind of came up with this concept of trusted data intermediary, because like, well, we do need some kind of intermediating entity that's able to create standardization around opting in that both respects the preferences of the data subjects, but also, and I think this is important, although you know this sounds slightly like sensitive, but also offer a service to model developers. And by offering a service, I mean, you know, if you have high quality data sets that are compliant, you know, that's valuable, right? And so I, you know, I don't know how this will play out, but I don't really see like beyond like the horrendous scenarios of there being complete like market capture by a few dominant entities, which could happen, right? I think the only other alternative is this building out of a new ecosystem where there is an intermediating layer, and that layer is not just organizational. I think it will need to become technical as well. So there will need to be some sort of like machine readable licenses, and you know, obviously, Hugging Face is an interesting platform that's kind of like moving in that direction to some extent, but I'm sure more will pop out. So yes, I think I guess the short answer is like I have no idea. I think nobody knows how this will play out. But what this opt-in, opt-out allowed for us, like this very basic binary simple first step, is to imagine that on the back of that, a more complex, nuanced, and hopefully balanced ecosystem can emerge.
So as we are representing an art school, I would also be interested if you think that the art school as an institution, of course, we have an educational goal. So educating our students in the field of AI and critical engagement with AI is something that is ongoing. But this concept of a trusted data intermediary, I find it really interesting, and I'm wondering if you could imagine that also art schools as institutions could act as in this role in collaboration with their students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any organization that has kind of a custodial role towards its stakeholders and beneficiaries, like that's why, I kind of in the beginning when I put this title up, civic organizations, and I guess university is a type of a civic organization, latent data keepers, that's sort of what I meant, that there's this very organic augmentation that's possible for existing actors who are access points to, I mean, it just sounds so dry and exploitative to say to data, but ultimately, like that's kind of what it is, right? It's like at the very least, I think they need to think about this responsibility in today's climate. And I think those organizations that have also the know-how and the resources to then really like practically operationally become trusted data engineers should by all means do it, because I think the more precedents we have this kind, the more learnings we'll have, and hopefully, I'm a big believer in creating precedent in contexts where everything is like there's no clarity. But like once I think you create a concrete precedent, even if it's like super strappy and like it's very bootstrapped and it has a lot of holes, but it's like it's a concrete thing. Others can learn from it. It can be iterated in different contexts, and hopefully we make a world a better place in the process.
Looking at the time, we should still give the audience a chance to ask a question, but I have to admit I have a follow-up question, maybe while the others are thinking about their questions or comments. I mean, this idea of a trusted data intermediary, we could also say, I mean, there are existing institutions, like I think in the UK, it's the Copyright Licensing Agency that represents artists or creators, let's say in general. In Switzerland, it would be Suiza for music or Proliteris for visual arts. What Let's ask it in a provocative way. What disqualifies these associations to take the role of data intermediaries? I mean, one could imagine they would be privileged to do that. So there is already existing structures and these things.
Oh yeah,
Why does
absolutely.
it
I
need
mean,
new institutions?
is there a reason why you think they should be disqualified?
No, no, no. I mean, we could ask, I mean, I'm not just asking the questions why we don't turn to these existing institutions. Why does it need new institutions?
No, I think we're aligned that it can be these existing institutions. In our case, we are our own existing institution, so we're just like, because the boundaries of our project was like, it was happening attached to this organization. If, I would love it if, I mean, I have a friend who is head of policy at DAX, which is the Design and Arts Copyright Society. It's like, I would love it if they would take up this trust, but and potentially they will. So it's, I guess the answer is yes, I think they should be. Um, it's just, yeah, that this specific experiment so far has been focused on the organization that I have at my disposal. If I worked in those other organizations, they would be the trusted data intermediary. But yes, it needs to, I think the existing infrastructure, and that's the same answer to the art school question, is the best place to start.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments? No? Max, you have another question or?
I have a lot of other questions. Yes, so one question I would be interested, maybe it's a bit of a follow-up question to Biok's question about how, like, is it this idea scalable? All the, let's say, human resources you also need to keep such a thing going, and where do you see potentials in like new technologies such as Web3 or blockchain or DAO, to like support this
Yeah.
negotiation process?
You know, this is a question that's very close to my heart because like in my ideal world, like we would have exactly this combination. We'd have like a token gated data set, which where you can use you can use smart contracts to enact the terms of the license and also for the traceability of the data set. For now, it's a little bit science fiction in this, like on a technical level. Like I think we're not quite there yet, but we might be in a matter of a couple of years. But we're also, there's also a lot of legal uncertainties around both AI and blockchain. So when you put them together, um, just the kind of five-dimensional chess of trying to like mitigate for risks and regulatory kind of compliance issues is huge. And so I think I can imagine like a lot of let's see, I can imagine VC money flowing that direction. And that's maybe interesting. I think that's like an experimental design space that probably, A16Z is funding, will be funding, etc. But like in the kind of more legacy world, yes, absolutely, we do need resources to be able to build capacity for this. And without some kind of policy intervention and without there being cultural funding that's sort of unlocked for that, it's not really a scalable thing. As we know, kind of in general, digital transformation has been so hard to pull through in the context of the cultural sector. So, this would be no different. So for this to really work, there needs to be like a sector-wide support of some form. Um, it's cute that we did it at Serpentine, but like it's a very specific. I'm very conscious of the fact that it's a particular set of circumstances that had to come together in order for us to be able to do it, and it's just not like this set of circumstances is not reproducible. It's just very unique to the time, the place, the people.
Yeah, that's the reason why we were so curious about to have you here and to talk about this. And probably that's a good point to end here. I mean, I just can only point to the future art ecosystems, all the work you have already done, and not only on AI. So I just put the link in the chat. So that's really, I think, a very valuable resource for this whole discussion beyond AI. And we are curious what the Serpentine will do next in this regard. What next
Hopefully not move on
technology?
too fast. Hopefully we can consolidate this.
Okay.
Yeah, that tends to be the case. But
Thanks a lot, Victoria, for taking the time in your busy week. The show is still up for 2 or 3 weeks if somebody happens to be in London, or the call is
it's
still
up
running.
until early February, and
Okay.
then hopefully it will tour.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So we are looking forward to that
hopefully.
too.
Let's see somewhere.
Yeah.
Have a
Okay.
lovely end of your day. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.